Our final presenter is Bob Rosenblatt. He'll present on living with chronic illness. Mr. Rosenblatt is the editor of HelpWithAging.com, a website providing help with the complex questions of aging. Mr. Rosenblatt also serves as a senior fellow at the National Academy of Social Insurance, where he writes a blog for NACI called, quotes, Covered.
There's good news and bad news about chronic illness. Our health system does a great job in keeping millions of people living to a ripe old age, but a lot of them are very sick along the way. We've cured infectious diseases, but we now have the problem of chronic diseases, which is something that you have and you don't really get rid of it. It's not cured, and you can live with it. The question is the quality of your life and the impact on other people. So we're talking about things like Alzheimer's disease, alcoholism, asthma, cancer, cardiovascular disease, depression, diabetes, kidney disease, so on. These are together the leading causes of disability and death. More than 130 million Americans have one or another chronic disease. These diseases are responsible for about 70% of all deaths in the United States. There are associated costs along with it, not just the medical cost, but the cost of the wages you don't earn, the time you miss from work, reduced productivity. For example, diabetes, estimated in 2012, the total cost of diabetes was $245 billion. That's $176 billion in direct medical cost and $70 billion in decreased productivity. For arthritis, $80 billion for direct costs and $47 billion for indirect costs. So what we're talking about here is that these effects are not just on the patients and the doctors, but on the patients' families. And these diseases come more with age than anything else. If you think about it now, people over 65, about 10,000 people turn 65 every day. So if you think about 100 people passing you on the street, 100 Americans, today 13 of them are over 65. In the year 2030, all of the boomers will have reached that age, so when you see 100 Americans pass by, 20 of them will be 65 or over. The good news is that most people over 65 are financially independent and in good health. They live on their own. They're not dependent on their children. In fact, these days, many of them are helping out their children financially, maybe helping them to pay for college or buy their first home. What happens as we age is we are more likely to fall into a situation where we have a chronic disease. Between 65 and 69 on Medicare, the number of people spend less than their share of the total outlays. In other words, they're healthier. And it sort of continues, but then when you get to age 80 is where the chronic diseases take a heavy toll, and more of Medicare money is spent on those conditions. One of the things that is important to note about chronic disease, the burden is greater for low-income adults. Poor people have higher rates of many conditions, including kidney disease, congestive heart failure, heart disease, mental illness, and diabetes. Minority populations also bear a disproportionate burden of certain chronic diseases, including high blood pressure, diabetes, and stroke. African Americans over the age of 50 are twice as likely as whites of the same age to have diabetes. Older Hispanics have a 78% higher prevalence of the disease. And then, in addition to the disease, there are higher rates of complications connected with diabetes, such as kidney disease and lower limb amputations. Here's what it does to life expectancy. Let's say you reach 65, you don't have any chronic condition. Your life expectancy is 22 years. You can be expected to reach age 88, and hopefully you're still playing tennis and running marathons at 88. But if you have a chronic disease at 65, your life expectancy is 20 years, which is really fascinating. When I saw this number, it means you have the diseases, but you're still living only 2 years less than someone who has no diseases. So that suggests to me, as I said before, we do a pretty good job of taking care of you. If you have 3 or more chronic conditions, you still have a life expectancy of 16 years to about age 81. So perfectly healthy, you're going to make it to 88. 3 diseases, you're still going to make it to 81. But those years between 65 and 81 are going to be hard for you and hard for your family. You'll probably be in and out of the hospital a lot, but it'll still be manageable. Looking on the good side of things, cancer, which used to be a guaranteed killer, is for many people now a chronic illness. Used to talk about terminal cancer and so on, but 5-year survival rates are the reality for 80% for many forms of cancer. So there are now millions of people who are living with cancer. All right, so what does this mean for economically? We know the medical system works very well, but economically it is a chronic disease can take a big burden on the people who are helping you and the people who take care of you. Here is the numbers for someone who is helping an aged parent over 50. You've got someone it's for Americans over 50 who are helping care for an aged parent. Here's what you lose. The average person loses $308,000 as a caregiver. That is what you lose from leaving the workforce early or working 3 days a week instead of 5, what you lose from the pension, which will be smaller than you would otherwise get, and what will you lose in reduced Social Security benefits. Because you are caring for someone, but at a personal financial cost. Needless to say, also a psychological and health cost of your own. So that is one of the issues that we haven't figured out how to deal with in terms of taking care of this. It has become sort of, it's become a personal responsibility. People say, well, I feel bad for you because you're taking care of someone, but it's your responsibility. It's fallen on you to take care of it. And the help from government is very limited unless you are really, really poor. One of the things that I put in the handout and the fact sheet, you can go online with the Centers for Disease Control and you can look up chronic care in each state and even in each county, the percentage of the people who are getting chronic care treatments. What we have then is it increases with age and then it becomes highly concentrated. USA Today did a very good series recently on what they call the sickest seniors. And it was 15% of the Medicare population that was responsible. It was for about 44% of all of Medicare spending. There were 10,000 people who ran up bills of $1 billion. So what we're talking about, these are people with 6 chronic conditions, and most of them involve Alzheimer's disease. Plus, on top of that, they would have heart failure or kidney disease or arthritis. All of these making the individual diseases harder to treat and harder to manage. We haven't figured out a way to deal with this other than to, hope that it doesn't happen to us. Medicare spending, interestingly, peaks at age 96 and then declines for the few people who reach that. So somehow if you get to be 96 and you're still going, the rest of your life will be pretty healthy. You won't be running up a Medicare bill. And I'm not sure why this is, but that's what the numbers show. So what we have now is a situation where the good thing is we're getting these miracle drugs, like you may have heard of Sovaldi, which cures hepatitis. It doesn't just treat it. In 12 weeks of treatment, you're cured, something you might have had, something some baby boomers have for 20 or 25 years. However, the 12-week treatment with Sovaldi costs $84,000. And then the question is, what happens? Do you get it? I have a friend who has had hepatitis and it was getting worse, and the doctor said, you need the treatment. I'm not sure if I can get your insurance company to pay for it. So she filed the preliminary papers with the bank to take out a second mortgage on her house so she could come up with the $84,000. But the doctor wrote evidently a persuasive letter to the insurance company, so she is covered by it. What we will now have, and this is interesting for each of your states, we're going to have, or we are having, a fight between the big insurance companies and the big pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies say we have this great cure, no questions about it. The insurance company said, yes, it's a great cure, but we can't afford to pay for it. And the rules are that once a drug is approved by the FDA, at least under Medicare, insurance pays for it. Sovaldi is approved. There are other drugs called Harvoni. Others are coming along. And theoretically, then, every state should pay for this under Medicaid because it's an approved drug. But the states are taking different positions. California pays for it, New York pays for it, Texas doesn't pay for it. Each state has a different position, and then they have what they call prior authorization. They will say, we will pay for it if the doctor certifies that the doctor has tried every other drug and they haven't worked. Or we'll pay for it if you get a biopsy and your liver is really just about to give out. If your liver is about to give out, it's cheaper for us to pay for Sovaldi than to give you a new liver. So in that case, we'll do it. So this is the fight that's going on, and I'd be interested, since basically I'm a reporter, is if something's happening in your state, send me an email as to what's going on. I would really like to do a big story on the policies. In preparation for this, I talked to Matt Sallow in D.C., who runs the state Medicaid plans, and basically the Medicaid states as a group have appealed to Washington saying, we can't afford to do something. And as he said, the response from Washington has been rather unenthusiastic. What the people in Medicare and in Congress are saying, well, it's a really bad problem, but we can't help you out. So what he's thinking about asking, maybe the feds would have a risk card and they say to the states, once you spend over X billion dollars, we'll come in and fix it up. But nothing has happened, so that's the discussion that's going on. Last year, Medicare spent $4.5 billion on new drugs for Hep C, including Sovaldi. That was 15 times as much as they spent in 2013. So it jumped from $286 million to $4.5 billion. And the research suggests there are 350,000 people on Medicare who have hepatitis C. A lot of them don't know it. So what we don't know is how long it will take for their conditions to worsen to where they really must have the drug. So that is both, I think that's a medical as well as a political issue. The drug companies are also developing other things. There are cancer drugs, there are drugs for multiple sclerosis, other things that are now getting close to approval, all of which will probably cost about $100,000 or more. So the question is, how are we going to pay for it? And the sort of the ultimate example that I like to cite here is there are 5 million people with Alzheimer's disease, and there is no cure now. There are a couple of drugs, but basically they mess up your liver. Suppose we have this wonderful breakthrough and someone discovers a cure for Alzheimer's disease, but it costs $200,000 a year. So the question then for all of you and the jobs you do and all the voters is, how much of that $250,000 should I, as a patient, pay? How much should my family help me with? How much should the government help me with? Those are really good issues, and I think we're going to have to face them in the next few years. Right now, the interesting thing is the drugs are sold all over the world, but the most expensive market is the United States. So Sovaldi costs about $84,000 here, but in Egypt, it's $900 or $1,000. However, right now, you can't go, legally at least, you can't go to Egypt or India to get the treatment because the way it works out, the governments of those countries say, we'll only pay for it if you're a local person. There's at least one insurance company which tried to organize a cruise. You take you your loved one, your family on a cruise, get your Sovaldi treatment, and while you're here, do a little sightseeing, and you still go home having spent a lot less money. That didn't work out. They were unable to make it work out. But individuals are now making these trips to various countries to get this. So that is yet another aspect to be explored. So I think, basically, to sum it up, the future of chronic diseases is, A, a lot more people will live a lot longer, a lot healthier, and that the sort of super cures are on the horizon, and how are we going to pay for it? So that will be, as I say, a fascinating economic, medical, and political debate. If you have any questions, thank you very much.